Hey everyone, it's the Underdogs. I'm Peter Keating. My co-host Jordan Brenner is not with us this week. The man never takes a day off, but he is on a family vacation. I don't know if there was a van pulled up to his house and men in sunglasses jumped out and threw him into it and drove him away. But we wish him and his family a very, very happy vacation. Without Jordan here, we're bringing in some heavy guns. We'll talk about Will Chamberlain, a political superstar, a little bit later on. But right now, we are pleased to welcome Sabrina Merchant to the show. Sabrina covers basketball for The Athletic and the New York Times. And we're here to talk about the WNBA as players return from the Olympics and the second part of the season starts. Sabrina, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime. We've talked a lot on our show this year about how there's so much more talent in the league, and there's probably as a result more parity. And at the same time, we see these runaway favorites, right, for things like MVP. I mean, I think Asia Wilson's minus 3,000 in the latest betting lines. And Rookie of the Year now, Caitlin Clark has established herself as a clear favorite. But there's an awful lot of suspense at the team level, right? I think the Liberty have just now recently established themselves as the betting favorite to win the championship. I guess I want to start by asking you, do you think we're going to get a Liberty Aces collision of super teams in the finals? Or is it more likely that one of these teams is going to maybe suffer a little Olympic fatigue or maybe stumble along the way? I mean, if they don't end up 1-2, they could even meet in a semifinals, right? Or earlier in the playoffs, like happened 2 years ago, right? So do you think we're on track to see Aces Liberty?
I think that scenario that you outlined where they meet in the semifinals before, a potential rematch in the finals is probably the most likely just because Las Vegas had 6 of its players in the Olympics,
Mm-hmm.
including, the MVP of the tournament in Asia Wilson. And she and Jackie Young carried a really heavy load for that Team USA, not unlike Brianna Stewart in New York, but just considering how much of Las Vegas's rotation was in Paris, has been busting it in terms of a minutes perspective since the start of the season because of the original injury to Chelsea Gray. I'm just not sure that Vegas can really pop up into that 2-3. So I think the most likely outcome is that they end up as that 4 seed and then we're sort of subject to a de facto finals in the semifinals. But, they have a couple games coming up against Minnesota that'll be really important in terms of determining their standing going forward. So
it's interesting you mentioned that because
yeah.
watching the Olympics, I couldn't help but think that in the last Olympics, which I still don't know whether to call them the 2020 or 2021 Olympics, but
I think either one is acceptable.
in those Olympics, Brianna Stewart got hurt, right? And when they came back, she was hurt, and Sue Bird had to sit out games, and there was definitely some kind of Olympic hangover going on with Seattle then. And I know the Liberty have had a couple of players, but you're right. I mean, the Aces had 4 members. Did you just name 4 members of Team USA who were
4 of Team USA and then 2 other Olympians. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so half a dozen Olympians. So there's definitely. So you mentioned Minnesota. Could they be, do you like them the most as another possibility to crash either the Final Four or that top 2 slot?
Yeah, that's definitely how I'd phrase it. Of all the other teams that have sort of geared up to make a play at this Aces Liberty duopoly situation, I definitely think the Lynx have the best shot. They've beaten both of them over the course of the regular
Mhm.
season, have a championship proven head coach in Cheryl Reeve, who's won 4 titles at the WNBA level, coming off the gold medal for Team USA. And I think they have the best individual player outside of these 2 teams in Nafisa Collier, who kind of just always gets a little bit overshadowed because she's not quite Brianna Stewart, but she's pretty damn good in her own right.
Yeah.
So I think her being able to come back from injury, just the defensive force that she is, the fact that Minnesota puts up a lot of threes, I think makes them really a high variance sort of team in terms of being able to match the offensive output of a New York or Las Vegas. So yeah, I think that's the team that I'd have an eye on as the one that's most likely to crash this party.
It's really interesting you mentioned high variance because Jordan and I do a lot of work in predicting March Madness upsets. And the key giant killing factors are mostly related to high variance, and smart way to take on a lot more risk to get a lot more reward. One is shooting a lot of threes. And of course, Minnesota shoots a lot of threes, hits almost 38% of them. Another way to do that is to press for turnovers. And Minnesota's getting turnovers on something like 20% of their opponent's possessions, which is huge. And so, from a giant killing perspective, even if Minnesota weren't as good as they are, I would love them as a party crasher, but they're also really good, as you point
Yeah.
out. Yeah. Um, do you see I guess the race for that number 4 seed is going to be really important because if you get 5 or 6 or 7, well, I guess 5 or 6, you're going to play a much tougher opponent and not have home field advantage. Is there any way that you see to sort out that kind of what we might call the middle of the top of the pack, like under the Aces and Liberty, and maybe leaving aside Minnesota? Who else in there might be good enough to make maybe the top 4? Who has the edge there?
Well, just from a record perspective, I think Seattle would have the best chance just because they're only one loss out of Las Vegas right now. I haven't been super impressed with their play after the Olympics. They can't hit any jump shots. It's a remarkable thing when you have a player like Jewel Lloyd and Sammy Wood coming off the bench. Just their shooting has just been ghastly, and I don't know that the addition of Gabby Williams, which I'm really excited about from like an overall fan perspective, and it's great that, a player of her caliber is coming back to the WNBA, doesn't really address that one particular need for Seattle. So
Hmm.
even though they're the closest, to that top 4, I just I don't think that they have the same level of talent, the same level of performance as, the teams that they would be trying to eclipse in terms of getting home court in the first round. Um, I think you just have to keep an eye on Indiana, honestly,
Hmm.
because their schedule is pretty easy going forward, and they have the fewest number of games remaining for the rest of the regular season. They've obviously come out like gangbusters in the last 2 games since the break when, 11 of their 12 players were in market and available to practice.
Right,
Only,
right. I mean,
yeah.
memo to all the Caitlin Clark obsessed Olympic fans. Caitlin Clark got to stay home and practice with her
Mhm.
team, and it's kind of showing, right? I mean, they've been playing great together. Um, there's some pluses there that people didn't talk about when they were complaining about all the minuses.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, their only Olympian was Christy Wallace for Team Australia, and she is, a more minor part of the rotation than some of the other Olympians we've talked about earlier in this, segment here. So I think just their ability to really use that time off to get a little bit better defensively. They look so clean offensively right now, and their schedule was just so heavily front loaded with that 11 games in 20
Mm.
days to start the season. All of those games against Connecticut and New York, and it's it's a nice home sledding heading into this
You know,
final part of the season.
that's actually why you might have to throw out a little bit of their analytics not looking great, like their net margin or their
Mhm.
stuff like it, because they played such a strong schedule to open the year, right? Mostly for what was it by design too, right? For publicity reasons. I did put Caitlin Clark up against the league's
Seems like
best
a smart
teams to
idea to
open
me.
things up, right? Yeah, yeah. It didn't work out so well for a month or two for Indiana, but it was a smart idea. Um, you mentioned Gabby Williams. I saw that you tweeted that since the Olympics, the number one question people have been asking you is, "Oh my God, I saw Gabby Williams almost single-handedly beat the U.S. Olympic team. Why is she
Mhm.
not in the WNBA?" Could we just take a minute or two
Yeah.
to discuss why that's the case? Like, can you explain for us what the prioritization rule is? I tried telling my daughters about it this morning, and they thought it was just like slave labor. I don't mean to use that phrase. That's a bad phrase, but they didn't get it. They didn't think it was good. I mean, I understand why it exists, but what is it and how does it work?
Yeah, so it was a concession that was received by the owners during the last collective bargaining agreement in exchange for a lot of the benefits that the players got. And essentially, the idea is that players have to report to their WNBA team at the start of training camp, or else they will be suspended for the entirety of the regular season in the WNBA.
So you had all these players who, when before the WNBA agreed to pay more money and benefits, were
Mhm.
playing in many other leagues, sometimes 2 or 3 in a given year, right? You might play in
Mhm.
Russia or Turkey or Hong Kong and then play in the WNBA. But now the rule is you got to leave that team and report to your WNBA team or else you don't play for a year, right?
Exactly. If you were under contract, and most of these players, their teams have been pretty magnanimous in terms of making sure that like they're available to come back to the WNBA. But some leagues just run a little bit longer. The Italian league runs a little bit longer. The French league, where Gabby Williams played this past season, runs a little bit longer. So if you're playing out a full season, if you're making it to the postseason, playing in semifinal and final series for your team, that just left these players unavailable to come back, for the start of the WNBA season. And Gabby Williams has inadvertently become the face of prioritization because last year in 2023, the only reason she was eligible to come back was because she suffered a concussion and missed the playoffs for her French team, and thus technically was no longer suiting up for them. So she could come back to Seattle and play during that WNBA season.
Do you see anybody else being a difference maker who could come back for the remainder of the WNBA slate?
Yeah, I think the big name is another Olympic star, Emma Mieseman from the Belgium team, former Finals MVP in 2019 with the Washington Mystics when they won their lone WNBA championship. just a super skilled forward play creator, really good shooter. She's obviously been really successful with the Belgian national team. And there are a couple teams, who have had an eye on her over the course of the season, saving a little bit of cap room just in case she decides that she wants to show up for the last 2 weeks of the season because they already know what type of playoff performer she can be.
And who might those teams be?
Well, we saw Phoenix make a
Hmm.
salary saving trade yesterday. They, dumped Shug Sutton for a draft pick, and that's cleared up a lot of room for them to potentially add an impact player for the rest of the year. New York has had a lot of success with international players. They could potentially be in that mix. So, there's a couple teams who maybe are still putting out some calls to Emma.
So we're just in the last couple of minutes we have here. Let's talk about the bottom rung teams that could get into the playoffs, fighting for those last couple of spots, not part of any kind of tankathon. Um, Earlier this year, I thought the team that could be able to make the kind of move was Atlanta, just because I thought Tina Charles had some more gas left in the tank than people realize, and she looked great against Connecticut last weekend. And then also, when you're trying to parse who's the seventh or eighth best team, you have to have somebody you have to have some kind of cool, maybe non-analytical reason. And,
Right.
Alicia Gray winning skills and 3-pointers. How can you not root for her? And how can you not root for that team? So does Atlanta have any chance here? I mean, if you see Indiana on the way up, who could maybe, is there any chance somebody moves up into an 8 or 7 spot from further below?
Yeah, I think that's honestly the only team I have on my radar is Atlanta, just because Dallas, their defense is just horrific, and the
Oh,
other couple teams,
that game last night. Oh my God. I mean,
goodness gracious.
they threw the ball away. I mean, talk about how many turnovers Liberty had, just delivering the ball to the other team.
Mhm.
But yeah, I agree. Go.
Yeah. And then we have, a couple other teams who control their draft pick, and this is going to be another momentous draft, I think, for the WNBA with Paige Beckers headlining it. So Atlanta, a team that does not control its 2025 draft pick, has every incentive to try to make the playoffs. And now that they finally have Ryan Howard and Jordan Canada playing together, which was impossible because of their injury situations during the first half of the season, I like their starting five quite a bit. As you mentioned, Alicia Gray, like just what a great story from All-Star Week, and I think everybody just loved hearing her voice, loved hearing her
Yeah.
experience from that night, All-Star Friday night. So yeah, they have just the right amount, I think, of perimeter defense. Tina Charles has been playing really well. Jordan Canada finally gives them a little bit of organization, which they have just lacked for the last year and a half. And I think this is a team that's young, that obviously wants to make the postseason, and just finally has all of its pieces together. So I think you definitely could see them going on a run.
Terrific. Listen, thank you so much. I think we take away from this, look at Minnesota at the top, look at Indiana rocketing up through the middle, look at Atlanta at the bottom of the playoff rung, and it's going to be an exciting couple of weeks. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, Sabrina. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Anytime.
This weekend, Saturday at 7 o'clock, we have a WNBA game coming up that I think makes for a really good under of the week. Our under of the week is brought to you by DraftKings. Dive into all the action with our partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers bet $5 and get 150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code Underdogs. That's Underdogs as in our show. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Now, on Saturday night, the Connecticut Sun are going to be playing at New York, facing the Liberty. And if you look up these team stats, you'll see them littered with defensive excellence. Connecticut allows fewer points than any team in the league. They do not allow good opponents to shoot from the perimeter. The Liberty, unheralded with all their ball movement and all their great passing and all their superstars, I think what people don't appreciate is how tough they've been on defense. They are second in the league in field goal percentage allowed. They're third in the league in scoring defense. These two teams are going to play a very intense game because playoff positioning is at stake. They're both excellent teams. The last time they met, the Liberty won 82-74. We don't know the line yet, but that was just 2 points above the line in that game. So I'm expecting the line to move up a little bit. The over-under total to move up a little bit, because these teams always have slightly inflated over-unders. Connecticut's played to the under in 6 out of their past 10 games, the Liberty to 7 out of the past 10. I think bettors expect these teams to score more than they're likely to, particularly against each other, particularly in a high-intensity game. If The over under here is 156 points, what they scored in the last game or more. This should be your under of the week. Connecticut at the Liberty, the Sun at the Liberty, under 156 total Saturday night.